Friday, monsters. Thanks so much for joining us for another episode of the MurderMurder News podcast. You should know that these weekly episodes double as weekly gatherings for our very own true crime cult.
That's right, we started a cult. But not to worry, you've landed in the cult with all the cutest matching outfits and none of the mind control.
If you're just finding us now, allow us to introduce ourselves, your charismatic leaders. I'm Angelina, and today I'm hanging out with my sinister sister, Aurora. How was your week?
Oh, it's been great. Looking forward to island time. Just pressing on. How about yours?
You move tomorrow, huh?
Yes, I do.
Very exciting. My week is less, I guess, less bright and vacation-y. I'm going to send you a thing right now just so that you can see what the fuck is going on right here.
Oh boy, it looks like there is an actual snowstorm in Montreal in April.
There is a snowstorm and fucking like 6 inches of snow fell while I was sleeping. And like the past 2 weeks, I've been just every time anyone asked me how I was, like my response was like, at least it's not going to snow again. And
oh
like,
no. Here we are.
It's done it. Here we are. So, I don't know. This still just feels like the apocalypse. I'm trying to find like positive, things to mention. Yeah, because it's like, I mean, I don't want to dig into the podcast every week and say the most depressing things because I know no one loves to hear that, but what the fuck?
I love the most depressing things.
It's gloomy. Yeah. So
it's my jam.
Here we are. Let's revel in our depression. Things are gloomy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, just because you tune into our show week after week, we like to think of you as honorary monsters. But if you'd like to be a bona fide card-carrying member, you can secure your spot in the MMN commune on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/murdermurdernews, where you can choose your tier of support. To show how much we appreciate you signing up, we'll give you a shout out on the show. You'll get exclusive access to our regular patron-only content, and we'll even name one of our adorable baby goats in your honor.
So let's kick things off with a look at some of the true crime stories that made headlines this week.
The body of 51-year-old Orsolya Gall was discovered inside of a bloody duffel bag this past Saturday in the Forest Hills neighborhood of Queens, New York. Ooh, I heard about this one from my Hungarian friends. A bloody trail led police from a duffel bag back to a woman's home just a few blocks away. Investigators say Gall went out with friends Friday night, and then just a few hours later, around 4:30 a.m., an unidentified person is seen on surveillance video dragging a heavy duffel bag from her home. Police interviewed her 13-year-old son, who was at home when the crime occurred. The boy was released, and the cops do not believe he had any involvement in the crime. Gall's husband and other children were out of the house at the time of the murder and have also been eliminated as persons of interest. The investigation is ongoing. Yeah, I believe she's Hungarian, I had heard from my friend Fanny, and that's how it popped up on her feed that a Hungarian woman was found murdered in New York. So I guess I could have asked her to make sure I was getting those names correctly, but super sad.
Oh, yeah. Well, absolutely. It's very mysterious, too, because, of course, I don't know, like it's rare that these kinds of things would just happen to a random person by a random person. So I guess like the talk online is like, who does she know or was she associated with that we aren't, aware of, or that authorities aren't aware of, like that they can check out, because at this moment they're kind of at a loss for like what the heck or who the heck this was.
For sure. And the last I heard, they were suspecting the son and the husband. So it looks like they've been cleared. Yeah. So very interesting.
Absolutely. And we have an update from the case of serial killer, the Happy Face Killer, who murdered at least 8 women in the Bay Area in the early 1990s. Though most are unconfirmed, Keith Hunter Jesperson has confessed to killing over 180 victims and is currently serving 4 life sentences without the possibility of parole for his crimes. One confirmed victim was recently identified after nearly 30 years of anonymity. The Santa Clara County Sheriff's Office has been working along with the DNA Doe Project since 2019 to identify the body using genetic genealogy. The Jane Doe, previously known only as Blue Pacheco, has been identified as Patricia Skyple of Molalla, Oregon. Known to friends and family as Patsy, Skyple was reported missing in 1992. Her Her body was found on the side of California State Route 152 in June of 1993. She was 45 years old at the time of her death.
We'll be right back after a quick commercial break from one of our favorite Darkcast podcasts.
Hi there, I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And together, we are the husband and wife team behind And Then They Were Gone, a true crime podcast about unsolved missing persons cases. Each week, we take a deep dive into a case that I have researched and written about and that you have never heard of.
Right. And I react naturally and usually leave you with a whole lot of stuff to edit out of the podcast.
Very true. But I do love getting your analysis and a fresh perspective on these crimes that I've been spending so much time learning about. So you can see us on your favorite podcast app every Wednesday when we release a brand new episode.
And find us on the socials at ATTWG Pod.
And you can also visit us on our website, andthentheyweregone.com.
Could you hold the key to bringing someone home?
And we're back.
Before we dig in, we want to offer a quick disclaimer. Though we joke about forming a true crime cult, that is not to diminish the severity of actual cult activity, and we want you to know that we take the cases we're discussing very seriously.
We want to deliver each story with the utmost respect to victims and anyone involved. If you feel we've missed the mark, you don't like our tone, or if you notice we've gotten any details wrong, let us know with a quick email to murdermurdernews@gmail.com and we'll make it right. Some specific trigger warnings for this week's episode include child abuse, grooming, manipulation, and child murder. So if any of those are particularly sensitive subjects for you, you may want to skip this one and listen to one of our other episodes instead.
Medicine Hat, Alberta, Canada. A 6-year-old boy finished his lunch on April 24, 2006, and his mom said he could go outside and play with friends. His best friend, Jacob, who was a couple of years older, lived a few doors down. The boy ran up to Jacob's front door, rang the bell, and knocked on the door, but there was no answer. I remember being this kind of little kid, knocking relentlessly, hoping that if I persisted, my friend's parents would miraculously open the door and allow my friend to come out and play. He hung around the front door a while, but with no answer, he eventually grew bored and walked around the front of the house, peeking in windows. The little guy hadn't quite grasped the concept of privacy, but today we're thankful for that fact because it led to a pretty important and timely discovery. Just 10 minutes after running out the front door of his home, the boy's mother saw him run back inside just as swiftly. Catching his breath, the boy told his mom that he thought he saw a dead body when he peered into the window of his best friend's basement. His mother didn't hesitate to call the police. Responding officer Brent Secondiak spotted at least one body on the floor through the basement window, confirming the child's report. Right away, he called for backup, and officers broke down the front door of the home at 304 Cameron Street Southeast around 1:35 p.m. Neighbors had gathered around in the front yard to watch. This was way more excitement than the little community of Medicine Hat was used to. Medicine Hat is about 180 miles from Calgary and has a population of just over 60,000. The small city has a pretty high rate of drug activity, like many tiny and isolated towns across Canada. But other than that, the crime rate is remarkably low. According to Environment and Climate Change Canada, Medicine Hat is also the sunniest place in Canada, averaging around 2,544 hours of sunlight per year. Medicine Hat is a big oil town, with the industry employing a good chunk of the population. Nicknamed the Gas City, Medicine Hat is known for its vast natural gas fields. English poet Rudyard Kipling wrote of the city having, quote, all hell for a basement.
Back to the basement at 304 Cameron. Authorities hope that aside from a crime scene, they might find survivors inside and be able to rescue them. Police immediately noticed an audible whining inside the home and followed the sound only to discover a poor dog mourning the loss of its companion. The dog was found crying, laying alongside the body of 48-year-old Deborah Richardson. Deborah had been stabbed 12 times and had a few defensive wounds indicating a struggle had taken place. Deborah's light blue nightgown was pulled up around her hips, leaving her naked from the waist down. There was blood smeared on her thighs, but there were no signs that Deborah had been sexually assaulted. Detectives surmised that the intruder had been surprised by Deborah upon entering the home and that she had been killed first. Stepping further into the home, the police came across the body of 42-year-old Mark Richardson, Deborah's husband, frozen in an unusual position. Mark's arms were raised over his head, hands clenched tightly into fists. Mark had been killed while fighting for his life, and rigor mortis had set in, freezing his body in a fighting stance. Beside Mark's body lay a screwdriver, which he had clearly used to defend himself. Mark fought hard and suffered several defensive wounds. In total, his body was found to have around 24 stab wounds. A black-handled knife was also found beside Mark, which detectives assumed to be one of 2 knives used in the attack. The assailant left a clear path for authorities to follow. Blood spray and splatter trailing from body to body and then up the stairs. It looked as though the killer was whooshing the knife in the air, flicking blood off the blade and onto the walls of the stairwell. This could indicate that the killer was in some sort of raging frenzy or in the midst of psychosis.
Investigators followed the blood trail upstairs to find the next victim, the Richardsons' 8-year-old son, Jacob. There was a pillow over his face and his throat had been slit. Several toys placed on and around Jacob's bed were also soaked in blood, particularly his favorite toy, a lightsaber, which police believe he may have attempted to use to defend himself. Quote, "It was horrific. It was gruesome. It was something I never wanted to see again," lead investigator Brent Secondiak noted, elaborating, "I've come to terms with it, but it wasn't pretty. It was the worst scene I've ever had."
No survivors were found at the scene, but authorities quickly realized that the Richardsons' 12-year-old daughter, Jasmine, was not in the home. Assuming that she was kidnapped, but hopeful that she might still be alive, police issued an Amber Alert. Fishing for clues, the RCMP first searched Jasmine's bedroom and then her locker at school. After some disturbing discoveries, the investigation took a drastic turn. Chat histories and emails on the computer in Jasmine's bedroom shed some light on where she might be. In her locker, a comic hand-drawn by Jasmine depicted murderous fantasies. Suddenly, Jasmine Richardson went from missing person to person of interest. Friends and classmates of Jasmine reported hearing her and her boyfriend bragging at a party on the night of the murders, her boyfriend allegedly boasting that he, quote, gutted the parents like fish. On April 24th, Jasmine Richardson and her so-called boyfriend were found 80 miles away in Leader, Saskatchewan. The two were canoodling in the back of a pickup truck driven by a friend of theirs and were promptly arrested.
We're hesitant to use the term boyfriend to describe this man because Jeremy Steinke was 23 years old at the time, 11 years older than Jasmine, who was a literal child. We all know that it's impossible for a grown man to have a child for a girlfriend and that a more appropriate term would be victim. We should also note that the two were sexually active, which is most definitely a crime. Later, Jeremy argued that the age of consent was 14 and he thought she was old enough. I've got big problems with the age of consent being 14, which was actually true back in 2006. In 2008, the age of consent in Canada was raised to 16, which is still not good enough. What the fuck?
Questioned by police, Jasmine first claimed to have come home to find her family massacred. Then she claimed she had been at the scene of the crime, but it was Steinke who did all of the killing. This explanation certainly seemed more plausible. Further interviews with friends of the pair revealed that they had shared plans to murder the Richardsons and had even tried to recruit some pals to participate, but everyone they asked had declined. Friends hadn't thought to inform the police because they didn't take any of this seriously. Plenty of angsty kids and teens talked a big talk about getting revenge on their parents, but everyone was pretty sure Jasmine was kidding. A further search of her computer and social media accounts rounded out the investigation. Most of Jasmine and Jeremy's interaction took place online, so there was a good record of most of their conversations. Friends and family say that just 1 year prior, Jasmine had been a straight-laced, church-going, straight-A student until suddenly her dark side started to show. She became fascinated by goth culture, started dressing in all black with an affinity for fishnets and dog collars, and rimmed her eyes in dark liner. Her social media accounts listed interests such as blood, razor blades, Bauhaus, horror movies, serial killers, and, quote, kinky shit. She started getting into punk rock and going to all-age shows, which is where she met Jeremy Steinke.
Pretty gross of an adult man to hang around at all-ages shows with young girls. He would also hang out at the mall all weekend, just like every 12-year-old girl in Medicine Hat. Jeremy told his younger friends that he was actually a 300-year-old werewolf, part of an ancient wolfy brotherhood and coven. The kids were pretty impressed. Fellow adults were probably not so gullible, which is why Steinke sought out younger pals. Steinke's background was pretty rough. His mother was an alcoholic, and some believe Jeremy was somewhat affected by fetal alcohol syndrome. Some say this would indicate that Jeremy's mental age was much lower than his actual 23 years, and some use that to excuse him hanging around with kids. Regardless, I'm pretty sure he could have found some 18 or 19-year-olds to date and left 12-year-old Jasmine alone.
Jeremy's biological father died when he was pretty young, and his mother replaced him with one violently abusive stepdad after another. Jeremy said one stepdad in particular would tie him and his siblings to chairs and force them to watch each other being abused. Kids at school picked on Jeremy and called him Stinky, which was a pretty low blow. The family was very poor, and even as an adult, Jeremy still lived with his mother in a trailer. All of this was certainly very traumatic and explains what led Jeremy down such a dark path. Jeremy had also allegedly made the switch over to a gothic lifestyle about a year prior to the Richardson family massacre. He shaved his head, wore dark eyeliner, and kept a vial of blood around his neck. Most people look back at the situation with the assumption that Jeremy turned Jasmine goth and had a dark influence over her. We're not so sure, mostly because the two met at a punk show, both likely already dressed in gothic garb. The most sensible scenario is that some kind of trauma sparked a dark interest in Jasmine and Jeremy alike.
It's easy to blame Jeremy for this whole situation. And while he's certainly guilty of some level of manipulation, I'm not convinced that a well-behaved religious child can be led astray at the suggestion of one creepy adult dude. I get that it's also hard to point any fingers at Jasmine's upbringing, considering the fact that her parents are now dead and they were so beloved by their community and life. The truth is, this is a complex situation, likely with a number of factors at play. That said, Jasmine's relationship with Jeremy was certainly a catalyst. While some point to Jeremy's traumatic history and mental health issues to explain why he went after younger girls, that behavior is predatory no matter who you are or where you come from. I listened to a number of podcasts in my research, and almost all of them were very cringy. Many stated that Jasmine actually manipulated Jeremy. Many called him her boyfriend. I heard the words, "That girl did not look 12" more times than I can count, which also feels kind of victim-blamey and seems to excuse Jeremy's interest in Jasmine. She may have looked a bit mature for her age, particularly when wearing makeup, but there's no doubt she was a child. She lied about her age on internet profiles, inflating it to 15. No grown man should be looking at the profiles of someone claiming to be 15, and any grown adult would notice that the person they were spending time with was a child. Podcasters called her downright evil and proclaimed that they have zero sympathy for Jasmine. For me, it's really not so cut and dry. Murder is complex, just like trauma is complex. Most angry reactions about the case contain messages like, if you're old enough to do the crime, you're old enough to do the time, and I don't care how young she was, she knew what she was doing. This kind of emotional reaction, however, has little basis on fact. Along with the rest of my sources for this episode, I'll post a link to an article from New Scientist called "Teenage Brains Can't Tell What's Important and What Isn't." This article explains the often risky behavior of adolescents by stating that the undeveloped brain literally cannot compute the severity or the inevitable consequences of any given situation. This part of your brain is actually not fully mature until around age 25, which I think we should consider when sentencing young offenders.
Jasmine's family history looked very different from Jeremy's. Mark and Deborah had both been addicts and very heavy drug users, and they met in a Narcotics Anonymous program. After healing from their addictions, both Mark and Deborah began to do quite a bit of work and volunteering within the community, helping fellow addicts to recover. They became very religious and involved with their church community too. Historically, the family was quite poor, but by the time the Richardsons moved to Medicine Hat in 2003, things were looking up. Mark got a job at a big oil company and then a promotion. Neighbors in Medicine Hat only had kind things to say about the Richardsons, but we will note that authorities didn't seem to interview anyone from their past or anyone from other communities they lived in, so who knows what the situation was like prior to the move. After meeting at a punk show, Jasmine and Jeremy added each other to all their favorite social media sites, including Nexopia and their mutual favorite, vampirefreaks.com. Jasmine's username was Runaway Devil, and Jeremy's was Soul Eater. When Jasmine's parents saw what kinds of things she'd been chatting about online and with whom, they confiscated her computer for a while and grounded her. They seemed pretty fair about it, saying she could still go to punk shows so long as one of them chaperoned. They forbade her from seeing her older, quote, boyfriend. They also started taking Jasmine to counseling sessions, which really seemed to help. Satisfied that she had learned her lesson, the Richardsons gave Jasmine's computer back. Little did they know she'd been plotting against them ever since being reprimanded.
Among early messages between Jeremy and Jasmine, Jeremy once wrote, quote, "You're a sight for sore eyes. I miss you more than killing people. Can we get together and kill people together?" End quote. Jeremy had never killed anyone before and was clearly just fronting, but impressionable Jasmine may have believed that he had some experience with murder. Shortly after being grounded, Jasmine drew the comic that was eventually found in her locker. It showed 3 stick figures, 2 adults, and 1 child, presumably supposed to be her parents and little brother. The trio went out walking in the grass through the sprinklers. The drawing showed 2 other stick figures pouring gasoline into the sprinkler line and then throwing a lit match onto the lawn to ignite her gasoline-soaked family. The captions say things like, "Ow, my flesh is burning off," and "Help, the unimaginable pain." She sent an email to Jeremy. "I have this plan. It begins with me killing them and ends with me living with you." Jeremy responded, "I love your plan, but we're going to have to get a little more creative with, details and stuff." Jeremy kept a blog where he wrote in some strange attempt at Old English like any 300-year-old werewolf would. On April 3rd, 2006, he wrote, "Payment. My lover's rents are totally unfair. They say that they really care. They don't know what's going on. They just assume. Their throats I want to slit. Finally, there shall be silence. Their blood shall be payment."
On the evening of April 22nd, 2006, Jeremy and Jasmine hung out with some friends and watched the movie Natural Born Killers. Inspired by the film, the duo decided they would carry out their plan the following day. On trial, Jasmine described sitting upstairs on Jacob's bed, comforting him and keeping him from hearing anything as Jeremy attacked her parents. Then she says Jeremy came upstairs and insisted that she must stab her little brother next. She said she wasn't comfortable and that she hesitated, and at first she claimed that Jeremy swept in and impatiently finished the job. Jeremy agreed to her breakdown of events until the part where the 2 of them were in Jacob's bedroom. He insisted that he never touched Jacob and that Jasmine easily slit her brother's throat with no hesitation. Jasmine told the court that she had only been joking when she talked about the murder online with Jeremy and that she never intended on actually following through with the plan. Stanky's friend, Casey Lancaster, was charged as an accessory, as she was the driver of the pickup truck that the 2 were found in when they were arrested. She'd agreed to help them get away and to help them get rid of some of the evidence. She was 19 at the time. During the trial, Casey took a plea bargain and was ultimately sentenced to 1 year under house arrest. She was also ordered to abstain from drugs and alcohol.
Jeremy Stanky was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole for 25 years. Asked why he committed the murders, he answered, "When you find your soulmate, you'll do anything for them. I did anything." An undercover officer was placed on the prison transfer bus beside Jeremy, and he said some pretty damning stuff to that officer, including, "You hear about that triple homicide? Yeah, you're looking at him. Me and my old lady have become legends." "You ever see Natural Born Killers?" he asked. "I think it's the most romantic movie of all time. He said he planned to marry Jasmine and that the two would run away to Germany and live in a castle. He told the officer that Jasmine slit her little brother's throat. It didn't bother her at all either, he said. She didn't cry or anything. In fact, the next day when we were on the road, she fucking was laughing about it. She's got a few screws loose too. Jeremy admitted to drinking a bottle of Vampire brand wine, snorting a couple lines of cocaine, and drinking a 2-4 of beer before heading over to the Richardson family home. This likely explains the disorganized nature of the attacks. He said that Mark Richardson, Jasmine's father, put up a good fight. He thought he was finished as Mark overpowered him, pinned him on the floor, and dug his thumbs into Jeremy's eyes. But Jeremy was able to ultimately overpower Mark. Jeremy said Mark Richardson's last word was just, why? And Jeremy answered his question by saying, it's what your daughter wanted. Jacob's last words were allegedly, I'm too young to die.
Oh, so sad.
I know.
Right from the moment that the Amber Alert was revoked and Jasmine became a suspect in her family's murders, her identity was protected. In the media, she was only known as JR, and when she took the stand, she was shielded from public view. The identity protection continued throughout her sentence and well into adulthood. Her identity was protected due to Canadian law surrounding child offenders. As an unfortunate side effect, her family's identities were also kept under wraps, which some argued let their story fade into the background. With few details shared about the victims, people stopped talking about the case altogether, which some say is an injustice against the victims and their memory. Another injustice is that the witnesses' identities were not protected, even those witnesses who were still children at the time of the trial. One witness took to Reddit to express her displeasure at being hounded and harassed all throughout the trial and for some time thereafter. Jasmine was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. She received a 10-year sentence reduced by a year and a half that she spent in custody while awaiting trial. She spent 4 years in a psychiatric facility and a further 4.5 years under community supervision. The latter part of her sentence was a relatively new sentencing option in Canada at the time of her trial in 2007. An intensive rehabilitative custody and supervision order, or IRCS, was developed for young offenders of serious or violent crimes who may have a mental or psychological disorder or an emotional disturbance. Jasmine was diagnosed with both oppositional defiant disorder and the much more serious conduct disorder. These disorders are in the same family as antisocial personality disorder, and sometimes these issues do grow into full-blown antisocial personality. The first chunk of time she spent under community supervision, Jasmine lived in a group home. After that, she lived alone in Calgary and attended classes at Mount Royal University, all while using an alias. The unimpressed witness from Reddit also expressed that she didn't feel it was fair that a convicted criminal friend of hers got to go to university for free when she could never afford that same education.
Jasmine is the youngest person ever to be convicted of a serious crime in Canadian history. Right on the cusp, Jasmine wouldn't have been convicted had she been just 1 year younger. There's no charge for murder carried out by an 11-year-old. Things also may have been different had she been just 1 year older at the time of the crime. At 12, there was no way she could be tried as an adult. In jail, Jeremy and Jasmine kept in touch at first, writing letters to one another. After being sentenced, Jeremy wrote a letter proposing to Jasmine, and she accepted. Ultimately, the two were forbidden from contacting each other, which is sensible. Jasmine is also forbidden from residing within the community of Medicine Hat and from ever owning firearms. Having served her full sentence, she was allowed to return to society in 2016. Her criminal record was expunged last year after 5 years of freedom without any further criminal offenses. Jasmine Richardson now resides in an undisclosed location in Canada under a new identity. Rumor has it she might be in Montreal. I have no idea if there's any truth to that bit of gossip, but it's creepy to think about while I live in Montreal myself. Jeremy, still in jail today, has changed his name to Jackson May. Most podcasts and publications I can find about the case express disdain for Jasmine's relatively light sentencing and for the fact that she walks free today. However, prosecutors insist that Jasmine's is a case of justice effectively carried out and that she serves as the poster child for rehabilitation.
Yeah, it's just interesting because I've heard this case so many times, and I think it's easy to forget that she's 12 because people do like to talk about her looking older. But it's like then in my mind, I'm like, oh, she was 15, right? But it's like, no, she was 12. She really was just like the smallest of small children. Like, that's so young.
Like an actual baby child.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, a tiny child with, serious psychological problems that had gone unrecognized. I mean, this is just what can happen in that situation, which is super disturbing. But it is very hard for me to point a finger of blame at her. And it really gives me a lot of thoughts about like the justice system in general and how these things work. And considering each person that has sort of committed a crime, it's like, again, it's not so cut and dry as it does seem to so many, like it's so easy to just be like, every criminal is an evil asshole and every victim is a poor angel. And it's like, there's more subtle nuance than that in like 100% of cases. So it's, and like, we have to remember that the justice system is not supposed to be about revenge. We're not supposed to punish and torture people who we think are evil jerks. Like, the whole point is rehabilitation. So if we're able to identify like a psychological disorder, treat it, and then the person's able to go on to school and get a job, then that's the idea. That's the whole idea.
Yeah, so. I do really appreciate the concept of revenge, but I do have to say that you are correct. That's not the intent here.
I get feeling it, but like that's feeling it as, say, a victim or a family or friend of a victim. Like, I get feeling like you want to get revenge, but the justice system, police officers, judges, juries, those people are not supposed to get revenge.
No.
They're supposed to do their jobs.
Absolutely, especially when a 12-year-old child is involved.
Yeah, exactly. So what have you been watching this week?
I have been packing for this international move. So it's been a little hard to like watch things I have found. Like I'll have something on when I'm packing, but that's usually a podcast. And so I've been listening to more podcasts recently. I did discover one that is interesting. There's only, at least last week, there was only 2 episodes out called Run Bambi Run. And it's about a woman in the 80s who was nicknamed Bambi, who was accused of murder. Many believe she was innocent of murdering a fellow police officer's wife.
Wow.
And I haven't gotten to the point where there's like enough evidence to make me doubt that it was her, but she was known on the news for being just this like stunningly beautiful woman. And I have to say, sometimes like people will say people from the 80s were very pretty, and then you look and you're like, oh, wow, they're so 80s looking. But no, she looks like the most beautiful, like 40s star. Like she's just like gorgeous. Like it really is true. Like even today, everybody would still think she's gorgeous. Wow. But I guess she had escaped from prison in, I believe, Milwaukee, and had gone on the run to Canada. And I don't really know the full story, but so far the podcast started off from the first 2 episodes pretty interesting. So perhaps check that out. Wow. And then I've just been listening to the Catfish podcast because I loved the show Catfish on MTV so much. And now it's available in podcast form. And it's just so satisfying.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't know there was a podcast for that, so I'll check that out.
I think a lot of the episodes, they've just converted the audio of the episodes into a podcast format. So it's possible that, if you're caught up on the TV show, that it's the same. But there's definitely some newer episodes, and I'm starting at the most current one. So I haven't, none of the stories are old for me to this point. Like
it's been like a couple years since I've seen any Catfish thing anyway, so it might not be familiar even if I had heard it. My memory works like that.
Right. And how about you?
Well, I watched a very original documentary, the likes of which I've never seen before. It's called Wrinkles the Clown.
Oh, I already hate
it. You might hate it, but I don't know. There's a lot of twists and turns. So it's on Shudder. So you can tell that it kind of has a scary element to it, which is
it's a documentary on
It's a
Shudder?
documentary.
I didn't know that. I thought it was only horror movies on there. That's interesting.
They have scary documentaries too. So
that's exactly my taste.
Yeah,
scary
totally. Same
documentaries,
here.
like written
Same
for
here.
me.
Absolutely. So this one, I don't know how much I can tell you without spoiling it because it's really weird. The only movie that I could possibly compare it to was if anyone has seen the documentary Exit Through the Gift Shop, which is about Banksy. It resembles that in some ways that I won't explain, but go check it out and you'll probably see the resemblance at a point. But all I can say is I was watching it at night. I was getting kind of sleepy. About 2/3 of the way through, I was like, maybe I'll turn it off and finish this tomorrow. And then I was like, I realized it was kind of hovering in this sort of limbo where nothing was happening for a few minutes. And I was like, let's just see if anything big comes out in the next couple minutes. And then the fucking biggest twist that I could never possibly imagine came out. So how it sets it up with the trailer and everything for this is that Wrinkles the Clown is a personality who... basically, he tried to be an ordinary clown and was not very popular. So he decided to be a scary clown. And he put out ads for parents to call if their kids were being brats so that he could come and scare the kids.
Oh, I hate that.
He wasn't touching them. He'd just appear in the backyard or peering through the window or something. And then after the kids had been scared by Wrinkles, they would have this everlasting threat, Wrinkles had these stickers with his phone number and the mom would be like, if you don't shut up, I'm going to give Wrinkles a call. And the kid would be like, no. And so there's all these voicemail recordings from parents and also from parents calling again, threatening their kid, I'll get Wrinkles over here. And you can hear them being like, no, don't call Wrinkles. And then there's kids calling, being like, Wrinkles, are you really real? And some of them are scared and some of them are excited. They show this one kid that is into it. And he's like, I really love being scared. And I think being scared is positive because it makes people laugh. It makes them stuff like that. Right. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of ways of looking at this. And all I can say is there are even more ways of looking at it than you will even think of right now. Just wait until you dig into this movie and what the fuck.
Oh my
But
God.
it's great. It's great. I recommend it. Just stick with it till the end.
I'll think about it. I'm already very
just
scared of
watch
clowns.
it during the day, but at the end, you'll be less scared, I think.
Okay,
but,
good to know.
But very cool, very cool. Also, I haven't watched this stuff, but I did discover some new things that is on my radar, and I'm going to watch it. And I want to suggest you all go watch it too, so that we can chat about it after we all see it. The first thing is this has been on for a little while, but I hadn't noticed it until just now. The Girl from Plainville. Have you heard of this?
I have. I've not seen it, but I have heard of it.
So it's Elle Fanning as Michelle Carter, which is the girl that texted her boyfriend 300 times, convincing him to commit suicide, which he ultimately did. And she was charged for manslaughter and convicted and was released from jail this past January. So she is out there too, just doing her thing these days, which is interesting. Definitely want to see that, but also this thing about a case I haven't heard about. The show is called Candy, which will come out on Hulu. It comes out, the first one, May 9th, and it's going to be a new episode every night until the 13th. Have you heard of this, the case of Candy Montgomery?
I've heard a little bit about it just in reference to the show coming out, so I don't know a ton about it.
I don't know too much about it either, but I'll read you the little promo blurb that they've released on the show, which is Candy Montgomery is a 1980 housewife and mother who did everything right. Good husband, 2 kids, nice house, even the careful planning and execution of transgressions. But when the pressure of conformity builds within her, her actions scream for just a bit of freedom with deadly results. And it stars Jessica Biel, Timothy Simons, Melanie Linsky, Pablo Schreiber, and Raul Esparza. And so they say it's created by the same team that did The Act, which I loved. Yeah. So I'll definitely watch this one.
Great.
Well, I guess that's enough murder for this week. If you have not yet met your murder quota, you can always get more on the OG MurderMurder.news, where we share the latest breaking true crime news every day of the week.
You can also find us on Instagram at MurderMurder News, on Twitter at Murder News, on TikTok at MurderMurder News, and on Facebook, you can just search for us by looking up MurderMurder News.
And while you're on Facebook searching for MurderMurder News, you'll also see our group pop up. You'll want to join that group to chat about murder with your favorite podcast hosts and fellow monsters, as well as to join our book club. We're still working on Underground, The Tokyo Gas Attack, and The Japanese Psyche by Haruki Murakami, and we'll be meeting Sunday, May 1st at 1 p.m. Eastern on Zoom. Hope to see you there.
If you like what you're hearing, don't forget to give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Ratings and reviews help new fans find the show and also help us know what we're doing right and wrong with the show. Feedback is important and we really appreciate it.
Have a great week.
Bye, friends.